Hello everyone, welcome back to another lecture for the course Python Fundamentals Building Blocks for Aspiring Developers. So we will continue with the third module where we are looking at the control flow in Python. According to our agenda, we are at the 11th day. Here we will look at iterations using the loop over different sequential data structures, that is lists, strings and dictionaries. So let's begin. So for loops, so it's just a recap of what we learned in the previous lecture. It repeatedly executes the code. It knows how many iterations it has to perform, and it can also be used to iterate over a sequence. That is the difference between this one and the while loop. We can iterate over a sequence in a while loop but indirectly, whereas for loop allows us to do it directly in very less line of codes. So this is one example of how you would do it. So in the example, you can see that I have a list called my list, and in the for loop, I am not writing for I in range. I am not giving it a range. Instead, I am saying for item in my list. So my list actually tells the for loop of how many iterations it needs to do. So it will do as many iterations as the length of the list. So if the length of the list is 5, it will do 5 iterations by itself. So as you can see, we specify the list variable, that is my list, and item, it is again a variable. It is similar to giving a number or any variable. We can do anything. We can say for I in my list, and when we say print item, it is actually accessing that particular item in the list. In the first iteration, the item is 1. In the second iteration, the item is 2, and so on. We can also have a look at that in the board just for some better understanding. So let's say we have a list. So let's say we have my list is equals to 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's say it also has a string in between, and let's say another string in between, and then at the end is a number. So what I would say, for item in my list, that is the name of the list, do this and print item. So let's say we have this code. So let's put it here. So we already know that how a for loop runs when we give it a range here instead of a list. So it is kind of similar in a list. The first thing we need to understand is that this item here, this is just a variable name. It can be anything. We can name it I, we can name it J, we can name it anything. So that doesn't matter. So let's see how the iterations will begin. So this my list, first of all, will return a value of the length of this list, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So here it says 7. So this says that this list or this for loop will execute 7 times. So this is 7 over here, right? So in the first iteration, what it will do is that in the first iteration, this item will access this value. So in the first one, this item will be equal to 1. Now when I say print item, item has a value of 1. So it will print 1. That's the end of first iteration. In the second iteration, this item has now moved to the next one. You can think of it like a number. Like in the previous one, without the list, we used this to keep count of the iterations. In the first iteration, this was 0. In the second iteration, this variable had a value of 1, then 2, and then so on. But in this one, does not have a value of 1. It has a value of this list at this position. So at the 0th position, so we say at the 0th position, this item has a value of this particular value at the 0th position. Now when in the next one, we are at the second iteration or value 1. Now this item moves to index 1 over here. So now this is equals to 2, this value. Now when we print this item here, it will say 2. So moving on to the next iteration. Now in the next iteration, this will move on to the next one. So it says, okay, now we have item is equals to 3 and it will print 3. We can do anything with the item over here. So it goes like this, then this iteration for 4. Then when it comes to this one, then it says, okay, item, what is the item? Item is this complete string. So now item has a value of, so let's say item has a value of this John. So this is a string. When I do print, it will print this thing as it is. It will be printed John. Now this iteration is complete. Now move on to the next one. So here it will print dough, and in the final iteration it will print this value of 8, and so the list is ended and it has run 7 times. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 iterations have been completed. Then it will exit out of the loop. We can use this item any way we want. Let's say we want to do, instead of print, we say let's say we don't have these two values and we say we want to print the square. So instead of this, we say, let's say double asterisk and square. We have this square over here. So in the first iteration, it will go to this one and print the square of this, which will be 1. In the second iteration, item now points to this value, has this value. We perform an operation of square, so now it will print 4. In the third one, it will print 9. In the fourth one, it will print 16. Just imagine we don't have these two here, and for this one it will print 64, and then it will exit out of the loop. So this is how it goes over a list. Now let's go back and move on to strings. So strings, as we already defined, are just like lists, a list of characters. So it performs the same exact concept. We specify the string variable over here, we give a variable over here, and then here we can access each character. So consider this a string. So first iteration will point to this character, then second one to this, then this, then this, then this, and then exit from the this for loop. Now similarly, we can also iterate over dictionaries. Now for dictionaries, since it does not have an index, we do not use indexes, and one item is in fact a key value pair. It is not just one item. These both are like dependent on each other. They are both like a pair. They cannot exist one without the other. We cannot have just this a and then a comma and then this. We will have to have these two here, a value and a key pair. So there are 3 ways we can iterate using the keys. We can iterate using the values and even using the key tuple values. So when we iterate using the key, so it will only iterate over these values. So this key will point to this one. Then in the next iteration, it will point to this B. It will not go over these values, only the keys, this, and this, using the same concept as we learned in lists. And then when we print key, it will print this value A, B, and C. So if we go there and we say using values, so to get the values first, we need to use this method, that is myDict or dictionary variable dot values. We learned that in one of the previous lectures. So what this returns is basically a list of values. If we go to this example, the list of values are 1, 2, 3. So it will return a list of values. Now this complete part has just become a list. So now we can do it like this. Now this has just become this. You see? So it is 1, 2, 3. Now it is just like iterating over a list. But the list is basically a list of values. So it will iterate in the same concept. Now we can also iterate using key value pairs. So what do we have here is that instead of having one variable, we have two variables. So first let's understand this part. So to get a list of tuples of each key value pair, we do mydict.items. It returns basically this thing here. Now this is a list in itself. So if you consider this one element, this the second element or item, this the third item in the list, it's just kind of like this. First item, second item and third item. So now it has three items. But each item has two things, a key and a value. So we write here key and value. So now when I iterate over this, I say print key and value. This key will print this part of the iteration, like this part, the key, and this value will print this value. Similarly, when we move to the second one, this is the key, this is the value. Now this key and value are just the name of the variables. We can name them anything. So let's start coding for this one. So let's begin. First, let's see how to iterate over lists. So let's say I have a list that is this 1 2 3 4 5. So what we want to do, for item in the list, that is my list, and then this, and then I say print item. So using the same exact concept, I will run the code, and when we execute the code, it is 1 2 3 4 5, because in the first iteration this item points to this item variable is now this in the second iteration, and in the third iteration is this, and so on. We can also name it anything. We can also say it as I don't want to say it item, I want to say it I do it like this, run it. It's the same because this is the name of the variable that accesses each of the items in the list. Now what I can do is that I can say I do not just want to print. Let's say I have a use case. So let's say calculate the squares of all values in a list. So this is the question I have. And one way of this could be without using a list. What could that be? I access each element. So I do print, I do my list, and I say 0. So this now has this element over here, zeroth element at first element at the zeroth index, and then I say I just want to square it. Now I repeat this, like how many times? I repeat this like 5 times, changing this value over here. So let's see if I do this for once like this and run the code. So it will be like correct 1 4 and 9 square for these three values, but this is not really efficient. This is why we use loops. So for loops, what will happen is that I will say I do not know how long the list is. I do not want to know. I just want to say, okay, I need for each element in the list, I will just use a list. I will just use a for loop to iterate over the list. And I will say print I square this value. So this is just like in the first iteration, it is just like this. So it is like 1 square 2. This is the first iteration. In the second iteration, it is like 2 square 2, second iteration, and so on. So this is I in the first iteration, this is I in the second iteration, this value. This is not the index of the I. So for example, if I change the values from this, now in the first iteration, it will not be this, it will be this one, because the I is pointing to the first item over here. So first item is 2, and it will do the square. So let's erase this one and run it and see how it goes. See 4 9 16 25 each element. This I is basically pointing to this element at each iteration and moves over. So this is how you basically use lists, and this is just one simple use case, but you can see how you can use the items in the list and perform operations over them using a for loop. So I will also show you another way of doing this at the end. But for now, let's just keep it like this and see for the ones iterate over strings. So strings is just a similar thing. So I say string, I love Python, and for let's say character, but we want to keep this short here. It's just a good practice. It doesn't matter if you name this variable too long. It has no effect on the code, but it's just good practice to keep this one a shorter one. For character in my string and do this, and we say print character, run the code. You see, I then space because here it is a space. Then moving on, prints everything. We don't really use too much of this with strings because we already have a lot of functions in the strings, methods of strings like replacing, removing spaces, find the elements. So we don't really need to do a list, need to do a for loop, but still it's good to know. So now, so one thing that I want to share is that this variable, when you are using it like this in a list or in a sequential data structure, basically you want to name it something that describes each of the item. Like for character in my string, because this item here is a character. So if I do it here, I say item, so I know that it iterates over each item in a list. So for example, if I have a list called temperatures, so let's say these are some temperature values I have 22, 34, 32, 23, 21, and so on. So I could also do this for I in temperatures. But a better practice would be to do for temp in temperatures or temperature in temperatures. So this is a better one, short word, but still describes what each item is. Each item is one temperature value. So this is a good practice, but it doesn't matter if you just use this or if you just do this. It doesn't matter. So now let's go ahead and see about the dictionaries. So let's say, so for dictionaries, let's say I have a dictionary, my dict is equals to uh, this. So let's say I will say name 1 is equals to John, name 2 is equals to Harry, then I say age 1 is equals to 32, I say age 2 equals to 33, then I say name 3 equals to Kelly. So I've written this name 1, name 2, so I can use them in an example later on. So just consider this one dictionary. So to iterate over a dictionary, first one we have using keys. So I say for key in my dictionary, do this, and if I say print key, now again I can have any variable name here. I can say I can say j, but it's good practice again to keep this descriptive of what is being iterated over. Since it is keys, so I say for key. So I save it, run the code. Now I have all the keys over here. Now I can also iterate the values over here. I mean, there is another way I can do this, but I will show you after this one. So let's keep it like this. First, let's use the for, let's say value in my dict dot items, do this, and let's say print well, everything seems fine, and run the code. So now it is, oops, I've done the other one before. So let's do this. We will come back to the items one later on. So now it has a values. So what this thing returns, it basically returns something like this. So it is John, then Harry, and then so on. So then so on, so on, so on, and then at the final one it is Kelly. So in between there is this 32, there is 33, and so on. So now this has just become a list like this one. So this is now just kind of a list, and it is just iterating over a list like this. Let's remove this. So now we have values. We can perform anything with the values. We can do a just print the values. We can use the values in any way. So now instead of doing this, there is also kind of a shortcut. So if I go back here and I go back here, just comment this out, and I say it is already giving me a key here, which is name1. Now if I have to access one value in the dictionary, so if you remember, I could do like this, name1. So now if I do this, it will get me this value for this key. Since we already have a key in here, in the first iteration it points to this, I can also do my dict and then key. Oops, instead key. So what this becomes is that in the first iteration, this thing is essentially this. This thing is basically this in the first iteration, because key here points to this key and I put key over here, so this means that this has a value of this. In the second iteration, this becomes this key. Now if you use the same concept as this one, let's say I'm at the first iteration, so this thing is basically like this, and now as we know that using this syntax we can access this value. So using this syntax, which is equal to this, I can access this value. So if I remove this one, save it, run the code, you see John, Harry, 32, we're getting the values. So these are just two ways of doing the same exact thing. Doesn't matter which one you use, both are kind of the same thing. So it's just your preference. Now let's also have a look at the items one. So I say for key value in my text dot items to this and print. I say key, I say value. Let me also do something over here, print my text dot items. This is just for the visualization of you guys do this. So now this thing here is this one. So if I copy this here just for the concept like this, so you see this is the list and this is one element of the list, which is a tuple. So this is the first element of the list. So instead of 2, we have this tuple over here, just the same thing. Second element is also a tuple, third element is also a tuple, and so on. So when I say key value, it says in the first item in the list or the element in the list, we have two things, a key and a value. So it says key is the first one, value is the second one. And now moving on to the second one here, second item, it says this variable points to this one, this variable points to this one. I can also name them anything. I can say k and v. Now k points to this one, v points to this one. In the next iteration, k points to this one, v points to this one. So we can use them as it is. You can see it like here. So I say print key and value. So let me just change it back. So I say print key. So in the first iteration, key was pointing to this actual key, it printed the key. And in the second iteration, it said, so in the first iteration, this value was pointing to this value here, so it printed value. Similarly, as we move on over iterations, it changes the outputs. So one use case for this could be that you want to print everything in the list, key and value. This is a faster way of doing this. So this is how you can iterate over dictionaries. Now I would said that I would show you another way to iterate over lists. So that is like this. So we can also, if I have this loop for I in range 5 and I say print I. So let's say I have this list. Just copy this one here, copy, paste it here. So let's say I have this list, my list 2. So if I want to access the first element of the list, this one, so what do I need to do? I need to do my list, oops, and 0, right? If I need to access the second one, I need to do this, right? This for the third one and so on. So let's say I know that this has a length of 4. I say I want to run it 4 times. Now this I here keeps track of iterations. In the first iteration it is a value of 0. In the second iteration it is a value of 1 and so on. It is a bit different than doing it like this. So in the first iteration it is a value of this. So I say my list 2 and here I say I. So this essentially is this. So in the first iteration I have the value of what? 0. So it basically becomes this. So this basically is this in the first iteration and this is the same. So this means that this code should print this element. In the second iteration I has a value of 1. So this means that this and this are the same things. So this will print me the second element or item in the list. So this should also do the same, right? So for 4 iterations, I should get 4 values because I say, okay, we have 4 iterations. I do this, I get 4 values. If I change the range to 3, it will only iterate over 3 values, not this last one. Now instead of giving a value myself, I can say calculate the value from this by itself. So how do we know how many elements are in the list? What is the length? We simply say length and my list 2. This code will return 4. So I can write this thing in place of this. So this thing will return 4 length of the list. So it says for I in range 4 and print everything like that, like before. Do this, prints everything. Now if I have, let's say, a longer list like this, it will calculate the length automatically. I do not need to provide the length. I do not need to first see the length myself and then provide it. Save it, execute the code, everything's being printed. See, so these are 2 ways to iterate over a list. This is the preferred one. This can also come in handy if there is a use case that requires it to be like this. But I would prefer you guys go with this one, the first choice, this one being the second choice if required. You now know both of them, so you can see according to your use case which one you need to use. So that was all in this lecture. Again, I would suggest keep on practicing about these things, loops and conditional statements, because these are used too much in Python. All algorithms are based on this. Try around with different loops, try around with different dictionaries, try and do different computations on each item of the list or dictionaries. When you are going over a loop, you can use the same concept as we learned for lists, for tuples, and even sets. That would be pretty much the same. And again, just keep on practicing about this one, and that brings this lecture to an end. So we will see you in the next lecture. Till then, goodbye.